Okay, so I'm trying to give this new version a fair shot. And so I'm going to go through all the classes one by one. Let's start off with the Barbarian. Now, in my mind, there doesn't need to be a whole bunch of different kinds of fighting men. That the original fighting man class was vague enough that you could play one as a barbarian or a knight or a samurai or whatever you wanted. But I have played with players who are really hung up on the title of their class, and so they really want to play a class called Barbarian, even so. So to placate those people, the Barbarian class was created, and of the different kinds, my favorite has been the Oriental Adventures version of the Barbarian. This Barbarian was well balanced to fit with all the other Oriental Adventures classes. It wasn't too powerful, it wasn't too weak. It was a really good, well done class. My second favorite was the one in Dragon Magazine, which was fun, even though it was overpowered. It was fun, but it and the Unearthed Arcana version had a problem dealing with magical items and wizards, and that made them not a good fit for most groups that I played with. So that limitation was taken away in third edition, and so, but this is a new edition, so let's take a look at this. All right, so the primary ability of the Barbarian is Strength. They have 12-sided hit dice, and their signature proficiencies are Strength and Constitution. Okay, that makes sense so far. They get to choose 2 initial skill proficiencies amongst a list of animal handling, athletics, intimidation, nature, perception, and survival. Okay, sounds pretty reasonable. Their weapon proficiencies are simple and martial weapons, so they're not allowed to use missile weapons. So they're just melee fighters. Their armor training is light and medium armor and shield, so they can't use plate mail. So they're not knights, they're barbarians. Makes sense. And their starting equipment, choose for all these classes, choose A or B. B is a certain amount of money. A is a good starting package, which is for barbarians, that's a great axe, 4 hand axes. I don't know why you need 4 if you're not good at throwing them. Explorer's pack and 15 gold pieces. So, yeah, so barbarians have several class features. First of all, they have this ability called Rage, which, I've seen this in barbarian portrayals in fiction, but when I was playing with third edition people, it seemed like it was being used too much. They were constantly raging, and that didn't make sense. But they're limited to only a couple of times a day with this edition, which makes more sense. But rage makes them more powerful, able to do more damage, and fun stuff like that. And there's another ability they have is Unarmored Defense, which allows them to use their dexterity and constitution modifiers to their armor class, and they can use this with a shield. Now, another version of a game I played had something called Frazetta armor, where if you were bare chested, you could use your strength and charisma bonuses to your armor class, but you couldn't use it with a shield. So I think if I run this, I'm going to rule that these 2 abilities stack, so you can use all 4 abilities, but you can't use a shield with them if you're using both of them. Anyway, let's turn the page. Boom. Okay. So their third ability at first level is Weapon Mastery. Now, this goes back to, in first edition, you had weapon proficiencies. You could only be proficient with a certain number of weapons, and if you use some weapon you're not proficient in, you'd suffer a penalty. The worst were magic users who could only be proficient in one weapon to start with, and they had a -5 penalty to hit if they tried to hit with some other weapon. While fighters had the best with 4 weapons they're proficient with, and barbarians had the least harmful penalty at -1 to hit if they were using a non-proficient weapon like the jawbone of an S. Here, barbarians can be proficient with 2 weapons. They call it weapon mastery, but it's the same thing. However, they can change which 2 they are with some training after a long rest. So that's not too bad. But if you look at this chart, the number of rages they can get increases with level. The amount of damage they do when they're raging increases with damage. They do extra damage when they're raging. And at second level, they get a danger sense. They get advantage on, which means I get roll 2 d20s and keep the best one. This is something stolen from mazes and minotaurs. They can do this if they are making a dexterity saving throw. And they also have this thing called reckless attack where they have advantage to attack, and their opponents get advantage to attack them. And then at third level, you start getting barbarian subclasses. They get abilities every level. Things like brutal strike, which allows you to do more damage, and more powerful versions, like faster movement, extra attacks, increases in ability scores, and more powerful versions of abilities they already had, like improved brutal strike and improved rage. So let's go into the subclasses. Okay, so barbarian comes from the Greek description of the Celts. It was making fun of the way Gaulish sounded to Greek ears. And so the Gauls are the prototypical barbarian. Every other barbarian is either not as bad as them or worse than them. But the Berserker is more of a Viking thing. And so one of the I'm old enough to remember when Barbarian was a subclass of fighter. Now, every class has 4 subclasses. I think some of these classes have subclasses just so that they'll have the same number as the other classes. But the first one is Berserker, and this is the prototypical barbarian. This makes sense. These abilities they get make sense. But the next one is Path of the Wild Heart. And this, you get some nature abilities. And I don't understand why you would run one of these instead of a ranger. Seems like, this is a class that's not needed. Mazes and Minotaurs had a similar thing in which later on they added an archer class, which wasn't really needed because depending on how you configured it, either the noble or the Amazon could easily be considered the archer class. Same thing here. We got this class that's not needed because it kind of does same stuff Ranger does. And the Path of the World Tree. This is a barbarian with some magical abilities. Why would you run this instead of getting a few levels of magic user and doing magic using and barbarian together? And then Path of the Zealot. Again, I don't quite understand why this is needed when you could run a paladin or better yet a cleric instead. This seems like it's trampling on their turf here. So yeah. So thumbs down on all the barbarian subclasses except Berserker, which seems barbarian-like. The others, not so much.